my name is Gail, and I'm our instructor for tonight. I don't know any of you, I think, which is really strange for me. I have probably taught 30 of these classes before. I've been teaching for the Art Center for about 10 years now, and they are hands down my very favorite class to teach. Our small town art center does a monthly, it's basically art and alcohol, let's be honest. It's always like watercolor wine, Cabernet and canvas, clay and cocktails. We do all sorts of different classes, and they're just my favorite classes to teach. We are gonna do this little pot painting project tonight. And this is actually one of the ones that was done in the session that we did last week. We had about 30 people on this session last week, and so we created a second class. I picked this image partly because it's spring and I love houseplants. I have so many that my son, who's 8, is always telling me I have too many houseplants, which I don't think is possible. And it's gardening season, and I'm just like in my garden all the time. So inspired by the spring and the growth and the plants. And also I picked this project because you can all have success with this, no matter your level of painting. Maybe you have never tried watercolor painting before. Maybe you've done quite a bit and you're just wanting to try a new type of project. So I am pretty confident that you will all turn out with something that is fun tonight. So I'm going to walk us through each of the steps. I will also explain all the colors and explain how to use your setup. What we're going to do right now is I want to explain how you should have your setup and how to get your colors reconstituted. Most of you guys got a kit in the mail, and if you didn't get a kit and you're using your own supplies, I'm going to explain to you what colors you want to use. We're going to start mixing our colors, and while we do that, I'm going to pass to May, who is the owner of one of our local family, our only local family wine producer here in Gunnison, and she's offering you guys a promotion for mail order wine. You can get, there's a coupon and you can get it sent straight to your house. So she's going to tell you a little bit about the wines that are produced here in Gunnison. So let's set up. Make sure your space has all of these things. You need a container for water. I'm using a yogurt container, a cup, anything is fine. And I really like having two, one for clean water, one for dirty water, so that I can kind of keep those separate, because sometimes I'm wanting to use clean water. So I would recommend that you have 2 containers of water. You need paper towels. Those are, hopefully, some of you got them in the mail, but if you didn't, if you're using your own supplies, grab some paper towels. You need your brushes that we sent you. We have provided you with a flat 1/4-inch brush and what is called a round brush. It's the smaller detail one. This is a number 1 brushes. Brushes are numbered by what size they are. So 1/4-inch flat brush, number 1 round brush. If you have other brushes on your own that you want to experiment with, that's fine. I'm going to be teaching you some specific brush techniques that you'll use with these 2 different sizes. You will want to make sure you have your paper. We gave you several pieces so that you can continue to practice this on your own. We will probably only have time to do 1 piece together. But if you have art experience and you're fast and you want to do 2 at a time, or you want to do more pieces tonight, that's fine. Also, you can do this in the future. I'm going to email, or Megan's actually going to email all of you the instructions to this class that are in a PDF format after the class tonight, so that you have everything that I have shown you, all the techniques I've shown you tonight, the list of colors, the supplies, and all of that, so that you could go on and keep practicing this on your own. You need some tape. We sent you these little tiny rolls of tape in the mail. You need that handy. If you don't have one of these rolls, just any kind of masking tape, painter's tape, anything would be fine. And you will need a pencil. I promise you don't have to do very detailed drawing, so don't stress out. I'm not going to make you draw all these little plants, promise. So don't freak out about the pencil. People like to freak out about the drawing. And that should be it. The last thing that will be handy is if you're in your kitchen, or if it's easy to grab, I am going to use a 1/4 teaspoon to measure the correct amount of water to put into my little trays. If you don't have a 1/4 teaspoon handy, it is fine. You can use your paintbrush to get water out of your paint tray. but a 1/4 teaspoon is handy. So if you're in your kitchen or somewhere, go grab one of these really quick. And then I'll show you how to reconstitute your water or your paints. In live classes, we would typically be using paints that don't need to be reconstituted, that aren't dried out. They're straight out of tubes. I prefer tube paints a lot over the tray, like the scholastic tray paints. Tube paints are thicker, they're more vibrant, the colors turn out so much better. You know, you always have that experience as a little kid, like using your little plastic tray, and no matter what you do, your painting turns out like crap, and you're like, it's like, I don't know how to watercolor paint. I think it's the paints. The paints are worthless. These tube paints are so much better. There's different brands that we use. These are a Winsor & Newton sells it's kind of like a college or a university grade paint. And they make a line called Cotman. And those are some of the paints that the Art Center uses. This is the brand that you can buy at Target or Walmart. It's called Reeves, and it's decent as well. Any of these tube paints are a great place to start. So we have provided you with these colors. We squeezed them out of the tubes for you. Now we need to turn them into paints. So what we're going to do is you have a variety of colors going around in your round palette. Your palettes should be more or less exactly like this color sequence. So this color here is burnt umber, and it's a really nice dark brown. You have either a Payne's gray or an indigo. Most of you, we gave you a gray. These are very similar colors. Indigo is just a dark, it's like gray with a touch of blue added. Okay, so you should have a gray. You have an alizarin red. You have 2 yellows, a darker yellow, which is called a gamboge or a medium yellow, and then a really bright light yellow, which we call lemon yellow. We've given you a darkish blue called Prussian blue, and then 2 greens. Viridian green is a real sort of bright, vibrant, not quite emerald, but almost. And sap green is a little bit more of an earthy green. And then you have this more color burnt sienna. Okay, so those are our colors. If you are working on your own, I'll keep this up here, and then when we have time, I can hold it up again so that you can see those colors. Yes, you have one empty space, and that is if you want to mix a new color. So most of you, we gave you gray, the burnt umber, the gray, and then all the rest of the colors, but not indigo. Because indigo and the gray are about the same color. So you have an empty tray, that is on purpose. Okay, so what we need to do is you're gonna take that 1/4 teaspoon, and for each of your trays, you wanna scoop out. You can see mine are a little bit different. I work on this really big palette. This is kind of my personal palette. I keep my paints in here all the time, and when I do projects, I get them wet again. They dry out, that's fine, and then I get them wet. Take a 1/4 teaspoon of water and dump it right on that little thing of paint. It should be about the size of a 1/4, maybe slightly smaller than a 1/4. So you can go around to all your different colors. Viridian, sap. I have more colors than you do, but I'm gonna go around and add all of those colors on my tray.
Hey Gail, quick question. So mine's like this too. Do you remember how the palettes actually have 9 colors because we didn't put the indigo on there? So is that something they can mix, or is that something they either got indigo, Payne's gray? Is that how it worked?
You got Payne's gray, and yes, you have an empty tray. If you would like a little bit more of a blue tone to your Payne's gray, you can just add some of the blue into your Payne's gray. I'll explain it as we get into the painting why you might want to do that. So don't stress about having indigo. I'm going to get to that when we start using our dark colors. So yes, I know you have 9 colors, and that is fine. You do not need the indigo color.
Okay, thanks.
Some people really like indigo, and some people have indigo. So if you have it and you're working from your own set, you might put it out there. So let's see, I'm getting all my colors, a little bit of water in each one. And after you have colors, or if you don't have a measuring thing, you can also just take your brush like this, and using your brush, just kind of scoop water and drop it onto your colors like this. You can even use the side of your tray to kind of get the water off the brush. That's an easy way to do it. If you happen to have one of these little like bottles or something else in your house, these are also really good tools for wetting your trays. You can like squeeze out a tiny bit of water into each tray. So lots of methods for getting water in your tray. While we work on our colors, Shamé is going to give the wine talk, but let me kind of show you what you're going to do. So now that these colors are soaking in water, you've got to work on them. And this is kind of the most torturous part of the project because it does take a while. Okay, so what you're going to do is, it's like a little clump, or maybe it's a little like string of paint. You want to actually work on that clump of paint. I'm using my flat brush. That's going to get you the most mileage. And I'm trying to work that paint until the entire clump has dissolved and has turned into liquid. And you want your paints to be about the consistency of cream or half and half, not too watery. If you add too much water, it's hard to go backwards. So err on the side of a thick paint. You can always add more water if it's too thick. And once you have worked a certain color, you want to wash your brush really well. And let's see here. It doesn't really matter what color you start with. If you start with your dark colors, make sure that you wash your brush really well so that you don't contaminate your light colors. So if you go from brown to yellow, really make sure that your brush is clean before you do that.
Gail, if they're using their own watercolor from a tube, do they need to add water to it too?
Yes, if you are working straight from the tube, that's a great question. If you are working straight from the tube, I'll give you an example right here on your tray. This is a Payne's gray tube, and I'm only going to need about a pea-sized, like a little green pea. You only need a little tiny pea size, or maybe your pinky nail of paint. And then you will do the same thing. You'll add about a quarter teaspoon of water. And again, it's easy to add more water if it's too thick. Start with a quarter teaspoon so that you don't over dilute it. And I like to rub my paintbrush on the edge of my tray so that I get all the extra paint off and don't lose too much paint by rinsing it out. So I'm going to rinse out my color, rinse my brush, and then I'm going to move to the next color. So how long does it take for them to reconstitute? It kind of depends on the nature of the paint. Each color has different properties. Blues and reds dry at different speeds. Yellow, it's really interesting. That's kind of a chemistry question. I'm not so much a chemist, so I don't know exactly why, but they do. And so it'll take anywhere from 10 seconds to a whole minute for it to start to reconstitute. But you do have to actually work on it. If you don't work on it, it'll just kind of sit in this puddle of like water and paint that are separate. So you do want to actually create those colors. And you want to try to keep your colors separate. Really try hard to keep your trays themselves pure. What we're going to be doing is working with this surface here in the middle of our palette. And in the kits we sent you either a yogurt lid or a plate so that you can have some surfaces to work on. And when we get into mixing colors, we're going to mix those colors here where there's white surface. And we're going to take them out of our tray as more pure colors. So I think, let's see, is there any other questions? Did we miss if we should stir it? You should stir it very gently. What I'm kind of doing to stir is with my flat brush, I'm trying to kind of push like this, push the paints to get them to reconstitute instead of like stir like in a circle. So try not to stir in a circle, try to like push the paints down. So we're gonna work on that for a few minutes because it's gonna take us a little while. While we're doing that, Shamé is gonna tell us about wines made right here in Gunnison.
All right, well, thank you so much, Gail. Can everybody hear me? Yeah, awesome. All right. Well, you all are in for a super treat. I got to do this last week with the group, and it was so much fun. I didn't know I was such a good artist. Thanks, Gail. I wanted to talk a little bit about our wine. So we have a winery right here in Gunnison, Colorado. We use all Colorado fruit. So we source our grapes from Palisade and Cortez, as well as Hotchkiss and Paonia. So we drive over to these farm regions in the fall time, and we bring the grapes back here to Gunnison, where we actually turn them into wine. Pretty fun thing to do right here in Gunnison. So we're in like a warehouse style winery. We have a big metal building, and in the back is where we do all the production. We have barrels and tanks, and then in the front we have a small tasting area. So next time you're in Gunnison, please stop by and visit us in our tasting room. In addition to that, I wanted to let you know a little bit about the collaboration we did with the Gunnison Arts Center in order to help facilitate the Watercolor Wine event. Unfortunately, because you guys were all mostly outside of the Gunnison area, we weren't able to ship the wine. Just monetarily, it's too expensive to ship a bottle of wine to folks, because you want to make sure that glass doesn't break in transit. So instead of doing that, we decided to offer you all a promo code, which you received in your kit. It's Gunnison Arts. So if you go to the Buckle Family Wine website, and that's BUCKEL, I'll go ahead and put it in the chat when I'm finished here so you can all locate it. But it's bucklefamilywine.com, and if you jump on there, you can purchase wines, and the Gunnison Arts code was originally for 10% off your wines, but because we had so many folks sign up from outside of the Gunnison area, we decided to, instead of offering that 10% off, we're actually offering free shipping. So you can take advantage of that and try some local products. So we hope you'll give it a try, and definitely visit us when you're in the Gunnison area. Enjoy your watercolor this evening, and thanks so much.
Awesome. Thanks, Shami. I am lucky enough to actually have the rosé wine here from Buckle Family Wines. So here's the rosé. Shami, do you want to tell us a little bit about this rosé wine?
Yes, I will tell you a little bit about the rosé. So the rosé is made from a Grenache and a Mourvedre grape. It's a Southern Rhone Provence style rosé. So a lot of the wines in that region use Grenache, Mourvedre, Cab Franc, Cinsault, Syrah. And we source the Mourvedre from Palisade, and then the Grenache comes from Cortez. And those two grapes are picked separately. They're fermented on their own, so they go through the fermentation process. And after they complete the fermentation process, we actually go ahead and blend them afterwards. So we blend the two varietals, and we make the rosé, which I actually have one that's not in a, it's in a clear bottle, so you can see the color. Very pretty salmon color. And we blend it, and then it goes in a bottle, and we get a label on it and get it out to folks. So, yeah. We also have a Chardonnay, which is the label here that I have on my hat. Does anyone have any questions?
I don't think so. Thank you, Shami. That was great.
You're
Sorry,
welcome.
I couldn't unmute fast enough. Do you guys distribute to any of the local Colorado liquor stores?
Yeah, so for folks on the Front Range, we are in Argonaut and Joy Wine and Spirits, Mayfair Liquors, which is it's on like 14th and Kramer.
Yeah, that's my favorite wine shop here in Denver.
Oh, you like that one? Yeah,
I love
those
Joy
guys
Wine
are
and
great.
Spirits. Oh,
Joy, yes.
Cool.
And then Rhino Liquors, which is in the Rhino area. It's a small store in the 7-Eleven. And then Grape Expectations. And
How about the Boulder area?
the Boulder area, Boulder Wine Merchant has it, as well as West End carries a couple of our wines. They don't have the whole lineup, but if you wanted to try all of them or look at all of them, Boulder Wine Merchant would be the place to go.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
I mean, how long have you guys been producing wines in Gunnison?
So we've been producing wines for about, we started our label in 2017. So we've been producing wines for over 3 years. Honestly, our red blend is a 2015. So with reds, they age for a longer time in barrel. And so we've got, one from 2015. And my husband's been making wine in Colorado since 2008.
Cool.
Awesome.
I'd love to get a gauge on where people are at with their mixing their colors, and I can't see everybody. So maybe looks like some people are still working and some people are like sitting up and they look done. So maybe you could put into the chat if you are done and your colors are reconstituted and you're ready to go. And I don't want to rush anyone, but I don't want to take too long either. So halfway, okay, that's fine. You know what? Maybe we should have a wine break since we just talked about wine. So if you are done, how about you go get yourself a drink, take 5 minutes. We'll make sure everybody gets caught up with their colors, and we will keep going at 6:35. I think 5 minutes might be enough time. The next step is to draw and tape. So if yours are taking longer, you could let them soak for a few minutes and then come back to it. The colors got chopped up in the like they like split apart. They should still, the pieces should still come back together. Nicole, what I would do is maybe, and if some of you have some that are kind of lumpy, that's pretty common. Mine get lumpy too. Let's leave them for a few minutes and we'll do the next step. And I think once we start painting with them, you'll find that they'll work themselves out. So we'll give it a few minutes. Watercolor paints get lumpy. It's just kind of part of it. And as we paint, they'll smooth out. Deanna's got one more. Awesome. All right, so I'm going to kind of get us started on the next step. I'm going to put my palette to the side just a little bit, and we are going to start in on planning out what we're going to draw and what we're going to paint here on our piece of paper. So the next step is to grab your pencil, and you're going to draw some shapes that you want to paint. And there's a few tips that you want to keep in mind for this. One is that you want to draw really lightly. You do not want to like scratch this out really heavy on your piece of paper, because we don't really want the pencil lines to show through. We just want to have barely a gauge of where we're going to paint. The other tip is that you can see that what makes these pots interesting, and here are two different examples. What makes the pots interesting is if there is a variation in the shape. So not every pot is the same size. Some have like fat, round bottoms. Some are skinnier, some are taller. Some might have a sharper edge. You just really don't have to stress about it. If you would like to make a pot with some other type of shape, you definitely can. If you want to draw a pot that has like, a vase shape to it or a lip around the edge or something like that, by all means, you can definitely draw whatever kind of pot shape you want. So you're going to start and you're going to try to do 4 squares. You can do 3 big ones. You can do 5 little ones. You can do skinny ones. You want to make sure you leave about 1/2 inch on the edge. So right here, all along the edge, leave about 1/2 inch. so that you have a little bit of white space. You don't want to draw your pots all the way at the bottom. So don't draw your pots like on the edge of the paper. Leave a gap. And just keep it really light and loose. And one trick is to draw one on one side, one on the opposite side, and then fill in the space with the two in the middle. That way they're not like weighted to one side of your paper or the next. And you really don't have to even be good at drawing squares to draw these pots, which is kind of nice. Kind of keep them loose. I'm going to draw one on that side and one on this side. And then I'm going to draw kind of a big one as my second pot here. And I think tonight I might, because I've already done this project a few times, I might go out a little bit out of the range and do 2 skinny ones just to kind of experiment a little bit with how that goes. You can make the bottoms of the pots a little bit fatter. Sometimes helps them have the sense of, you know, sitting on the surface. That's it. That is all you have to draw. And it's so light, you can even, like, I have to get the right angle on the right light. You can barely see what I've drawn because I'm not weighting my pencil hardly at all. We aren't going to erase these pencil lines unless for some reason it ends up dark and you want to. You can erase pencil lines under watercolor, but these probably won't need to be erased. We are not going to draw the leaves. The leaves we are going to paint with paintbrush techniques. I'm going to show you how to use your paintbrush strategically to make the leaf shapes. So that's it. You are done. So once you're done with your pots, you can like toss your pencil to the other side of the room. No more drawing. That's it. Sometimes the drawing element of watercolor painting is intimidating, and it can be a painting medium that's very heavy on drawing. A lot of the watercolor paintings I've done have started with really intricate pencil drawings. I have a drawing and painting background. I have a BFA in painting and drawing from Durango, and yeah, it's a drawing type of a medium, but there's a lot of ways that it doesn't have to be drawing focused. So that's kind of where we're going tonight. Okay, looks like most people have their shapes. So what we're gonna do next is we're gonna use our tape, and we are gonna experiment with masking. We are gonna be trying to mask the spots on your pot that you want to be highlights. So these are the spots that are gonna keep the brightest whites. And what we do in watercolor painting is we use masking as a way to use the paper to create the highlights. Instead of using white paint, you gotta see it in different lights. Instead of using white paint, we try to use the white paper to our advantage. This one has a little bit, these pots are a little bit darker, a little bit more contrasting so you can see the masking. Okay, so I'm gonna show you how to tear these and make these shapes, but we're gonna be tearing tape and placing it along one side of the pot. And you can see on this pot, all of these tapes are on the right side of my pot. I placed a few along the top, and on this very last pot, I placed a little tiny one on the opposite side, okay? So we're gonna kind of be creating a place on our pots for a highlight. And how you're gonna do that, take some of your tape. I'm gonna just tear off a small amount, and then using my fingernails, I'm trying to tear super small pieces of tape. And how I really like to do it actually is the straight edge of the tape, I usually tear that off entirely, stick it to something, stick it on the table, and then I use the jagged and organic edge of the tape as one of my edges. And now I am tearing this little tape into a shape. Okay, so I have a piece of tape that is sort of long and skinny like this. And yeah, painter's tape. Yeah, Lori, yep, painter's tape. If you had a kit from the Art Center, it should have come with this little black roll of tape. This is masking tape. This is just black because I had it from some other art project and we sent it to you because we already had it. But any kind of painter's tape is fine. Okay, so now using my drawings, see if I can do this in the light, I'm going to strategically place that little piece of tape. You want to make sure that wherever you place your tape, you have a gap of at least an eighth of an inch between the pencil line and where you put the tape. So don't put the tape exactly on the pencil line. Move it in 1/8 of an inch. Leave yourself just a little bit of space. When you paint these, you want there to be just enough paint on the other side of the tape that it looks like that highlight is firmly on your pot. And here's the other example. Both of these are kind of different, so I'm going to kind of show you both. Okay, they can go kind of diagonal, they can go vertical. More or less, you want to keep that highlight in a vertical shape. You can tear more than one for each pot if you want. You could tear like a bigger one and then a smaller one and kind of stack them up next to each other. Sometimes it looks really cool if you have 2 pieces of tape that have a little tiny gap between them, because that gap's going to fill with paint and it's going to be really interesting. And no matter what shape pots you drew, you should be able to find some places where you can put some of these little masking bits. Masking is a really fun technique in watercolor painting, and there's lots of ways to mask. You can mask with tape. You can mask with masking fluid. Masking fluid is something that you buy. It's not as easy to ship, and we decided it was going to be really hard to ship you all masking fluid, so we went for tape instead. I like tape personally because you can get really organic shapes with tape. Masking fluid is a lot more like glue, so you end up with really round, like more drops. And you have to be really detailed with it. Yeah. One of the fun things about using masking as a strategy in watercolor painting is you get to pull it off when you're done. And it's very satisfying. It's like picking a scab. And it turns out all beautiful and you're like, ah, and the highlights pop out at the very end. It's very exciting. When you get your masking tape on there, do push these down fairly well. You don't want to like grind them in with your fingernail, but you want them to be pushed down enough that the paint will not leak underneath your tape. All right. So, when you are done, you should have your little pot shapes, 4 or 5 of them, however many you wanted to put on there. And you should have little tape pieces all across. And it'll look a little strange at this point, but that is exactly where we want to be. This is masking fluid, in case anyone's interested in seeing what it looks like. Something you purchase, also called frisket. I'm not sure why it's also called frisket, but that's another name for it. You use a paintbrush and you kind of paint with it. It smells like glue. All right, looks like a lot of you are done. If you are a fast worker and you're finding that you're finishing way early, you can definitely consider doing more. I find that these make really great, and you can do a bunch of them, and at the end you can actually like cut them and use them as little cards or gift tags, or attach them to things, or write little notes on the back for people. So you kind of can't have too many of these. They make really fun ones. If you want to keep going, if you're fast, just do a bunch more. They'll all turn out differently, which is also fun. Oh, I'm getting a wine question. Is the rosé dry or sweet? Oh, see, now that's assuming I know a whole lot about wines. It smells like strawberries.
I think Sean may left the call, so I can find out for you, Nicole. I'm happy to ask. I don't really know.
A little bit more on the dry side.
On the dry side. Nice.
I was just asking for an opinion, not the professional whatever.
I'm going to go with dry. I'm going to go with a little bit drier. I'm not super into really sweet wines, but this is a really delicious wine for sure. It's really good. Yeah.
I had it last week, and I'm not a fan of rosé, and I really liked it.
Yeah, I would go buy this for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was out of rosé tonight, so I'm on red, unfortunately.
You're on a red lane.
I'm on the red
I
wine.
love rosé in the summer. Rosés and whites, but yeah.
I know, and now people are adding rosés with sparkling water. That's the thing, right? Love it. All right, you guys, it looks like most people are done, so we'll keep going. All right, what we need to do next is get ready. We're gonna actually start diving in and painting the pots first. So what you wanna do is clean out your brush really well. And we are gonna start with some fresh water. This water has now had a lot of colors because I used it to mix my pots. So I'm gonna go dump this out. You can just dump it in the sink, it'll be fine. It's water-based, so it won't clog up your sink. And refill your waters with fresh water. Well, I'll come back in 1 minute when we get fresh water.
How many of us just send our men to do this chore instead of getting up and doing it ourselves?
That's a great idea.
Thank you, honey.
Oh, look at, somebody just got handed some. Like, thank you. Love it. That was Jen. One of the things I really like about watercolor painting is how simple it is with the water. I have done all 3 of the main painting mediums and taken classes, are acrylic and oil and watercolor, and I studied watercolor in college, and I came back to it when I had my baby, and I found that he could be napping. I don't know how many of your parents, but when your kid is napping and then they wake up, you just have to drop whatever's going on to go get your kid. And I'd be watercolor painting and it was fine. If he woke up, I could stick my paint brush in the water, wash it off really quick, and leave. And I couldn't do that for anything else. I can't do that for oils or acrylic. It's a much more complicated process. So I love the simplicity of watercolors. They dry out, you just add more water. It's great. You can forget about it for 2 months, and then you can come back to it and be like, oh yeah, and you can add more water, and it's the same. And it's just really nice. Okay, so here we are. Let's paint these pots. So I'm gonna teach you a technique called wet on wet. We are gonna use our flat brush. Deanna's asking which brush to use. We're gonna use our flat brush for this. I'm gonna kind of clean mine off one more time. It still has some residual blue on it. Now that I have clean water, I'm gonna make sure I have a really clean brush. And a wet on wet technique is just a way to get water on your paper in a certain area, add color, and then help the color spread. So by getting the paper wet first, it helps the color be more mixed, more layered, and spread more evenly. So what we're gonna do with our pots, I'm gonna demo it first if you wanna watch and then try, so you're not trying to like look at the computer and paint at the same time. That might be most successful. I'm gonna show you this technique, and I'm gonna show you it again, and then we will kind of take a few minutes and you'll try them on your own pots, okay? So the first step, some people, if you're working on like a really big painting, you might tape your whole entire painting down because the paper will get all wavy and you want it to dry flat. We are not painting the entire paper, and it's so small that I'm not going to tape mine down. So what you're going to do is first you're going to mix the color that you want for the pot. Okay, so you should have a palette. Your palettes are probably these round ones, and so you have a flat space here that you're going to mix your colors. And we want to find some colors that we want for these pots. You can see in this example my colors are a little bit more muted, and in this example they're a little bit darker. They're only darker because I painted it with a slightly thicker paint. Okay, so I'm going to start with kind of this bluish gray color. So I'm going to grab my paints, and when I say grab my paints, I'm just using my flat brush. I'm going to try for a little tiny bit of my Payne's gray, which is actually for me is already out. I'm going to grab a little bit of it and like scoop it out, kind of like scoop it out onto my palette until I have like a quarter size or more. And then I'm going to wash my brush. And I'm going to scoop out a little bit of my burnt umber, which is this nice dark brown color. I'm going to scoop out some burnt umber. And I'm going to put these colors in a proximity to each other without touching. And you'll see why, because we're going to use the proximity to mix the colors. Okay? So at this point, I kind of have these two colors. And then I'm going to also get my Prussian blue. And I'm rinsing my brush in between each one. So my Prussian blue is this dark blue. Over here for you guys is kind of the only blue really that you have right now. Scoop some out. And on your little space, it's fine if these are fairly close to each other because we're going to kind of use them to mix anyways. Okay. Always washing my brush in between. And you can use your paper towels to kind of dry your brush occasionally. If you do that, it helps you discover how much paint is still in your brush. Okay, so I have my three colors. A tiny bit of a fourth color that I might want for these pots is some red. So I'm going to kind of grab just a little bit of my alizarin red. And if they're still a little bit chunky, it's okay. Grab a chunk out and you can kind of mix the chunks on your flat surface as we work with them. Okay, so I have my colors in proximity. I'm going to start, and we might get a few more colors as we work. I'm going to start by trying to make kind of this darker color. So using my brush, and it's just damp. I don't need to dry it off in between. I'm going to use a little bit of the gray and a little bit of the blue, mix them together in their own pile. And I might come over here and grab a tiny bit of the brown and then go over to my new color and see what happens there. I'm not liking that. That's actually a little too dark. I'm going to continue to move towards the blue. And I'm like moving towards the blue. Ooh, okay. Now I found a color that I think I like. Okay. And so my colors are starting to get somewhat mixed in here, but I'm using that like mess and puddle of colors to find the color that I most like. And all of you might have a slightly different color. So I'm going with a color that's pretty heavy on the blue. It's got a tiny bit of the gray, a tiny bit of the gray and the brown just make that blue a little bit more earthy. Okay? I find my color. Now I'm going to leave it, wash my brush, and now I'm going to do my technique. Okay? Yeah, do you want me to show you the mixing part again? So let me see if I can kind of show you a little bit closer. My pure colors are right here, gray, blue, and brown. And I'm like just stealing little tiny bits of my pure colors to mix a color that is just next to my pure colors. And what's cool about doing it on this big open surface is while I'm mixing, if I'm like, that should be bluer, then I just move closer to my blues. Or if I'm like, ooh, that should be grayer, then I kind of move my color closer to the blue or closer to the grays. Okay? So having them here allows you to make them a mess. We don't want to mix them in the trays, because if you mix the tray and you don't like it, you've ruined your whole tray. If you mix them on the flat surface and you don't like it, then you can wipe it off with a paper towel and start again, okay? Christina says her video keeps stalling. Is anyone else having video problems?
It stalled for a second for me and then it got better.
Okay.
Oh, for her, it's not
Christina,
moving.
I'll demo this again with the next pot. So I'm going to keep going, but you'll be able to catch up hopefully because we're going to do this 4 times. Okay, so while my color is mixed, here's the next step. I'm going to take a wet brush, just wet. Megan, can you help Christina maybe get closed out and get back in or something?
Sure. Yep, I got it.
Okay, so I'm using my wet brush. And I'm only holding this up because I'm trying to get it close to you guys. You'll do this on your surface. I'm going to paint my pot with straight water, and I'm painting right over the top of the masking tape, and I'm kind of I'm using my flat brush to push the water out to the edges of the pot. And it's going to be impossible for you guys to actually see the water, but trust me, it's going to work. And if you want to hold your paper up in the light, you can see what part of your paper is wet and what part is not wet, okay? Once your pot is wet, you want it to dry just a tiny bit. You don't want it to be too puddly. Kind of move that water around until it's just barely damp. And when it's just barely damp, you're going to grab your color that you just mixed, the color that you like, and scoop a bunch of it up onto your brush. And we're going to dab that color starting on the left side of our pot. We're going to dab that color in and pull it around on the pot. Watching it, it's going to kind of spread in the water. And if it's not spreading very quickly, add a little bit more water to your color. Make your color a little bit more watery, and it will spread, okay? Now you want to spread it just on the left side of the pot. Then rinse your brush, and using just a damp brush, you'll pull the color across to the right. And what this is going to do is create kind of a variation from dark to light in that pot, okay? So I'm starting with my darkest color on the left side of my pot, and then dry your brush off a little bit, and using just a damp brush, pull it. And what's cool about watercolors, if it's not spreading enough, use more water. If it's spreading too much, dry your brush off a little bit. The drier your brush is, the less your color will spread. The wetter your brush is, the more your color will spread. And you can it's pretty forgiving. You can kind of go back and forth between drying your brush off, getting more water, drying your brush off, getting more water, until you have that pot that's starting to spread all around. It's always a good idea to add a few dark colors kind of right on top of your paint highlights, so that when you take the tape off, your highlights have some nice contrast. So I'm going to add just a little bit of dark right around my tape. And I'm kind of dabbing with my brush, right? So I'm kind of using the flat brush, maybe twisting it a little bit to try to get some of that color in. Again, if it's not spreading, add more water. If it's spreading too much, dry your brush off and use a dry brush to help spread. Okay. So I'm adding a little bit of a darker color right on top of the tape here. And before it's super dry, I'm going to grab my round brush and use my Payne's Gray straight out of the color, not mixed. And I'm going to add a little bit of that Payne's Gray, like in a line, right kind of across the bottom of my pot. Like that. Mine might have been a little too wet, spread more than I wanted, but you can kind of mess around with that. I want to have a real dark edge to my pot. So I had my blue layer first, and right as my pot is starting to dry, I'm going to add that darkest color. Just right along the edge, a little bit on the bottom. We will come back into this pot when it's totally dry and add some kind of textury details, okay? You will have kind of a chance to add a second layer to this when we add some texture details. So don't stress too much about it being like exactly the finished pot. By details and texture, I will show you some examples. These little pots kind of have, see these little extra bits? We're gonna add those after our pots are dry. Okay, so I'll show you that. Don't worry about it. It's not, we still have another step. Okay, questions before I'll demo the second one and kind of show you a different color. Questions on this, and this is the very first time, maybe you've done this before, but for a lot of you, I bet this is the first time you've done this particular technique. Don't expect it to be perfect. Don't be too hard on yourself, right? When in doubt, drink more wine, and it will all be okay. And you get to practice this. This is why we're going to do a bunch of them, okay?
Do you want to maybe go over the colors you mixed together again, just in case? I always think that sort of info is helpful.
The colors I'm using right now, the colors I used for my first pot were the Prussian blue with a little bit of gray and a little bit of my burnt umber brown. Other colors, I might actually pull some of my burnt sienna out for my next color. We're using our grays and blues and our rusty reds and browns for these pots to make them look like clay, like ceramic pots. That being said, if you're working with your own colors and you want to make this pot like like really bright pink, fuchsia, anything, I really don't care. You can definitely make your pot any color you want. You could make it bright yellow. There's no rules about it.
At this point, I would say if people have questions, they could just speak up and ask while they're working. I think that would be okay.
I think we're probably ready to go on to the next pot. Are you guys ready to try pot number 2? Yeah, great. I'll show you, I'll demo the second one, and then I'll let you try the third and fourth kind of on your own with whatever color combinations you want. And I'll kind of talk through my color combinations, but you guys can do your own. So for the second pot, I'm going to do a slightly different color combination. I'm going to do something that's kind of contrasting. So instead of my blues, I'm going to go with these kind of rusty oranges. If you don't have any space left on this particular palette piece, then you might grab a plate, even like a kitchen plate would work just fine, or your yogurt lid, or if you have a yogurt lid in your kitchen, anything that's kind of a smooth surface will work. So I'm going to have a little bit of burnt sienna, and I'm just going to put mine right here next to my brown, because I really don't need a ton of it, and I'm probably going to mix it with some of my brown. So I'm scooping it out, kind of putting it on my palette, and I already have the other colors I need. So I'm going to start to mix a color I like, and my colors are already touching, which is fine, right? I put them so close together that they're kind of touching between space where they're touching to see if I can find a color. Grab just a tiny bit of this red. So now I'm using my burnt umber, the dark brown, the burnt sienna, which is kind of my rusty orange, and my alizarin red. And right in the middle of those 3 colors, I'm trying to find a color that appeals to me.
So quick question about paper. Deanna had a question.
Yes.
My paper did this too a little bit. It kind of bubbles up when you put water on it. It kind of warps a little. That goes away when it dries. Mine did, but I just wanted to ask if that's something. Was it too much water, or is that normal?
Yes. You're talking about how just the pot itself kind of goes like this, and is a little tiny. Yes, that will dry flat. That will dry flat.
Okay. Thanks.
And yes, the more water you put on the paper, the more bubbly it will get. If you do, like, sometimes this technique can be done on a whole sheet of paper. You can get the whole paper wet with a sponge and then drop paint on your paper, and the whole paper gets covered with color. It's really fun. But when you do that, you have to actually tape your paper down flat, or the whole paper will kind of bubble and be funky. Because we're doing these little shapes, it's fine. Okay, I think I have a color I like. It's somewhat reddish, somewhat brownish, somewhat orangish. That's a real technical term, but that's the color I have. So I'm going to leave the color I found. I'm going to clean my brush. And you don't have to have your brush crazy clean because you're going to add color to it. You just don't want it to be really loaded with paint for this technique, okay? So using my water, again, I'm going to paint that space with water, kind of using the light in the room to really see where you're pushing the paint or pushing the water. And I just got a lot of water on mine. And if you have so much water that when you move your paper, it actually like rolls, like your water drips, that's too much water. You want to dry your brush and kind of just pull the water back off. And you really do have to kind of use the daylight a little bit, or the light in your house to see. You don't want it to be puddly. You just want it to be damp. The trick in Colorado is that you have to work quick because things dry out fast. So it's damp, now it's like go time. Now I get my color, damp brush, go get that color, and I'm gonna drop that color in here on my pot and push it around, watch it spread. Again, I'm kind of starting with my darkest color right on the edge. And if you want to change your color as you go, like if you start painting with it and you're like, oh, that's not exactly what I wanted, I actually want it to be a little bit more brown, then just go scoop some of the brown that's next to your color. Okay. If it's not turning out very dark, you want to go get more paint. You want more paint. If it's too dark, more water. Water it down, it'll turn it lighter. Add more paint, it'll be thicker. And kind of spread. Now I'm using my damp. I'm kind of dampening my brush off on the paper towel as I go to control where the water is. Don't forget you want to add some color right underneath those highlights. Most of you guys are in Colorado, and I will say that watercolor painting in Colorado is trickier than in other places. I spent a summer in New Hampshire and it rained all summer there. Man, I could put water on my paper and stay wet for like 45 minutes. It was crazy. Colorado, it's like 2 minutes and your paper's dry. So dry. It's as dry as our skin and our fingernails, right? Don't forget to add your dark colors. So I'm gonna grab my round brush when this is starting to dry. And on the left side of my pot, I'm gonna come back in with some really dark colors, let those blend. You want those dark colors when your pot is still somewhat wet so that they blend with your color. Otherwise it will end up looking like a big, like kind of fat black line. And you can experiment with textures at this point if you want to. You can definitely use the tip of your brush like this, your flat brush or your round brush, and kind of dab colors in and see how they dry. As your pot is drying, if you have a brush that's kind of dry, you'll notice that the brush itself makes a bit of a texture. And when you have paint on that textured brush, you can add some little bits of texture. So I'll kind of show you guys what that might look like. Okay, I just kind of added, I don't know how well you can see, but I just kind of did a dry brush. My brush was pretty dry, and then I got some color, and I just dabbed it straight up and down, like, let's see, straight like this. All right. So at this point, you can kind of choose what colors you want to do. If you want to alternate, you can go do another blue pot and then another orange pot, or you could do a brown pot and then a blue pot. I think on mine I went bluish gray and then kind of this reddish, terracotta reddish color. And then I made a pot that was a little bit more of a brown with like a tiny bit of red in it, but a little more of a brown pot. And then I went back to like a bluish gray. And I did that on purpose to sort of round it out, right? So it goes gray to gray and your eye goes like this, around and around. So that's one strategy of composition, is to end and start with a color that's similar, and then in between to make these two different. That's one strategy. You can definitely pick any color you want. If you want to make a green pot, you can. Keep in mind that the plants are going to be green, and so you might stick to the non-green colors for the pot. But I did see last week a few people made some green pots, and they turned out really nice. Okay, so we're going to do these next pots. Same technique. You might even use some of the colors you've already mixed, or mix a slightly different version. If you have questions, this is a great time. You can just turn off your mute and ask a question if you want. And when we're done with this, we'll take a quick break before we go to the next step.
I have a question. How many brushes do you typically work with when you're painting?
That's a great question. This is my kit set up right here. This is what I have at my house.
Oh, okay.
Great. And in here I have all my paints, all my tube paints. And then I did this really high-tech, version of how to keep my brushes. I took duct tape and I duct taped these little brush holders along the side of my thing. So I have these little brush holders. But I probably have 25 brushes. And I even have a few more at home. I have like really wide brushes that I use to do big washes on a big surface. But I often have a lot of different brushes out. But again, like if I'm working small, I might just use two. One of my very favorite brushes to use, I use it almost all the time, is called an angled brush. And I have it right here. I use this brush more than anything. This is also a 1/4 inch, but instead of being perfectly flat like this one, it's angled. So this is one of my favorite brushes. These are more expensive to buy, but they're worth the money. They usually cost like $5 to $8 for one brush. But they're super awesome. Let's see, my pots are drying out. Get my colors on. You might have fun experimenting with having one pot with a lot of water on it and drop some color in there and see what happens. And then have another pot with like barely any water and see what happens there. All right, you guys are looking busy over there. I love it. Everyone's like all focused. When I am not teaching for the Art Center, I am a middle school teacher. I teach at the Gunnison Middle School. And I do not teach art, actually. I teach ESL, and I work with our Latino students primarily. And I've chosen not to teach art in the public schools partly because middle schoolers are terrible at following instructions. And so I love teaching art to adults because you guys, look at, I like giving instruction and adults are like, oh, we ask questions. It's great. It's a really welcomed break from my middle school hours. And I love teaching middle school as well. Let's see, somebody says, are there other types of paper you can use other than this one for watercolor painting? Yeah, there's a ton of types of watercolor paper. This paper is a very standard cold press paper. Cold press is kind of the more traditional watercolor paper, and the weight of the paper is usually something around 140 to 180. I think this is probably 140. You can buy hot press watercolor paper. Hot press watercolor paper is smoother. It's very, very smooth. This paper has a little bit of texture to it, and hot press paper has almost no texture. So wet on wet technique on hot press paper, it's like the water just spreads, but it's kind of uncontrollable too. So it's used for different types of techniques. Hot press paper is a lot more expensive. And so it's a lot of professional painters will use hot press. And then they make watercolor boards, which are really cool. Watercolor boards are like sort of like a little piece of masonite almost that have a watercolor paper already glued or already adhered onto the board. They're like the thickness of like a really thick tag board. And what's nice about those is they don't bubble. So you don't have to tape your paper down. They are very nice to work on. I really like working on cold press watercolor boards. They're also somewhat expensive, but they're really nice. You can buy watercolor paper in forms of cards, like pre-cut to make like holiday cards. You can do all sorts of cool stuff with watercolor papers. And you can watercolor on standard paper, but it does bubble more, which is not always something that you want. All right, so we're gonna get our pots finished up here. If you're already finished, maybe take a quick break. We will clean our water out again because now we have this muddy water with blues and browns, and we're gonna clean it out before we do our greens and our yellows. So feel free to do that if you're a little bit ahead. Finish my pot here. I will show you how to come back and do a second layer if you want to. Do you guys want to do another layer? How are people feeling? Yes, Amy's like, yes, I want to know that.
Yes.
Great. I'll show you how to do another layer. We do need to let our pots be somewhat dry before doing another layer. So if they're not dry yet, blow on them a little bit. I probably shouldn't have done 5 pots because now I'm going to be the slow one because I took on an extra one. All right, I'm going to let these ones are dry, but this one is not yet, so I'm going to kind of let it dry for a minute. Usually you could blow them a little bit. They'll dry pretty fast when they're these little small pots. You fan them like this. If you really get your whole piece of paper wet and the whole thing's wet, you can use a hairdryer, but usually in Colorado, that's not very necessary. Has it been dry in Denver? It has been so dry here. We need rain so bad. I'm desperate for it to rain. It keeps teasing us and raining like a tiny bit. I'm like, oh, come on.
I moved up from Louisiana, and I went from like 90% humidity to 10% humidity. And I bought a humidifier and coconut oil, and yeah, it's taken me a bit to get used to it.
It's rough. The dryness is rough, especially in June. It just sucks all the moisture out of your skin, right?
It does, yeah.
So Christina asked, what's the best way to preserve the paint after we're done today so they can do more paintings? Because we are going to have enough to do more.
Sure. Really, all you need to do is let it dry. It will dry. You can't keep it wet, really. It will dry. Let it dry out, and then add a little bit of water. Then so if you have the same exact palette that we used today, and you want to use it tomorrow, there's going to be less paint in it. So don't add a 1/4 teaspoon. Add like a few drops. Because if you add a full 1/4 teaspoon to less paint, then it's going to be too watered down. You guys get to keep these, obviously, these palettes and these sets. And if you want to buy your own sets, you can buy a set of these colors. They come in a box of like 8 or 9 colors from Target or Walmart or on Amazon. And these palettes are great to use those in. But you don't really have to preserve the paint. My palette, I use this. It has a lid. It comes with this like little plastic lid. So when I'm done at the end of the day, I cover it so that like dust and little bits of things don't get into my paints. But it dries, and then I water it down the next time. It'll dry even in a few hours. Even within one painting. If I'm painting for an afternoon and I have 2 hours to paint, I will wet all my paints. And by the time I need a certain color, I go to get it, and it's already dry, and I have to add more water to it. So it's just kind of natural part of it. All right, let me show you guys how to do a layer. I have a blue pot over here on the edge that is dry. Okay. Sometimes layering is nice to do with a complementary color. We are using complementary colors already. Complementary colors that we have goings are blues and oranges, right? Blues and oranges are opposite. I wore my orange earrings with a blue shirt. Probably looks black too, but it's actually blue. Because complementary colors make layering, and they make good composition next to each other, because our eyes like colors that are opposite from each other on the color wheel. So what I'm going to do with this complementary color, I'm going to have a damp brush, and I think I'm going to use just a little bit of like one of the colors I've already mixed. I'm not going to necessarily mix a new color. I'm going to use kind of an orangish color, and I'm going to get a damp brush and then get a little bit of the color, and then I'm dipping my brush into the water one more time so that it's pretty wet. I want this color to go up. Color. I'm gonna paint that second layer on, and then I'm gonna wipe my brush off on my paper towel. I don't need to clean it first, just wipe it off so it's dry, and spread it out so you don't end up with like a line of water. And it's, until mine dries, I can't really hold it up vertical, but I will in a sec. What that does, if you can see, is it adds just a little bit of like a brownish orange tone on top of the blue. It's very subtle, so it might be hard to accurately show in the video. I'll do another one with the orange, and I'll use the blue complementary on top of the orange. what this does is it kind of knocks down that primary, that strongest color. It adds a layer and it makes more of an atmospheric effect on your pot, so it looks like it has, I don't know, just a little bit more realistic tone to it.
You did freeze for a second, so if you could repeat what you did with the the color.
Where you want the color to go. Great. I'll just kind of show you with the second one. I'm sorry if it froze for a sec there. So I'm going to use my complementary color, load the color, and then dip one more time in the water. And then I'm going to start on my darkest side, the same side I started on before. And I'm going like down the left side and across the bottom. And just very lightly pulling that color with drying my brush off on the paper towel and pulling the color across to the right. So I'm starting on the left and kind of applying it down and across the bottom, and then drying my brush on my paper towel, and then coming back to finish that line and make it. So on the orange pot, you can see it added just a tiny bit of a blue layer on top of the orange pot. Let's see. And somebody asked, at what point is paint no longer usable? It really depends on the quality of the paint that you buy. The fancier the paints, the longer they'll last. The cheaper the paints, the sooner you'll know. It just they don't become very vibrant. I would say, I mean, I've had paints that are like several years old and they're still fine. They're still making good paint. Does the quality of the paint slip away with every use? I suppose in theory, but that you'd have to be like wetting it, using it every day in some huge quantity. I've never really found that to be a huge problem, Christina. Okay, I'm gonna do this second layer on my other 3 pots. I'm gonna add at least 2 of my pots. I'm gonna make my second layer out of a tiny bit of a greenish color. I'm gonna get just a little bit of my sap green. If this is intimidating, you don't have to do green. I'm gonna get a little bit of my sap green and a little bit of my blue mixed together, and a very light layer of this green color over one of my pots. I'm gonna do it on my skinny pots. And it's different than painting our whole pot green. The pot is still kind of the original color, but the green adds just a little bit, I don't know if you can see that, adds a little bit more of a greenish tone on top. And this is a great point at which you should add or can add some details, and I'll show you how you might do that. Add my final layer here. While these pots are kind of drying, I might come back and add some little tiny texture bits. You can see on some of my examples, I added, like in this pot, there's some like little black dots in the corner. And in this pot right here, I added some little black dots. On some of these pots were drier when I did this. I tried to add like a line that sort of looks like a crack in the pot. Yeah, same thing on this one. I added some to make it look sort of weathered. You know how you, like on Pinterest, if you look up barnwood, there's all these ways to like take nails and like jam them into wood and make it look weathered, and then you paint on the top of that and it's supposed to look old. That's sort of what we're doing, right? So I'm just taking my round brush, my fine point brush, and my darkest color. So you would use the Payne's Gray. If you have indigo, that's a great color to use. If you don't have indigo, you can add some blue, add your darkest blue to the Payne's Gray to give it just a tiny bit of a blue hue. And you can either do that in your empty tray, or you could do that out here on your pot. I think I already have that combo. You could also use your darkest brown, your burnt umber. So I'm gonna get my Payne's gray, straight dark. And if you have sections that are wet, you can add little tiny bits into that. If you want to try like some little tiny lines, I'm holding my brush really upright like this, and I'm going to kind of like wiggle my hand a tiny bit like this to create those lines. Okay. Don't push your brush down too hard, or you'll end up with like a blob sort of in your pot. You might experiment with giving the very left edge of your pot and the very bottom edge of your pot a fairly solid, thin black line. And that'll help delineate between the pot and the surface it's sitting on. Same thing on the very right side of your pot where the colors are lighter. You can add like a little dark line. And you're just using this little round brush, you just barely want to tap it on the paper. You could even practice. You have some of these scraps. If you're intimidated by making lines with a paintbrush, just take one of these little pieces of paper and practice making super thin lines with your round brush. One thing that I notice my hand does when I try to make thin lines is I find my pinky finger I want to anchor like this. I anchor my hand with my pinky finger, and I'm just holding my brush like a pencil. I'm just rocking my fingers back and forth. And that's one of my most successful. When your hand's up here all loose, sometimes it's like, it's really hard to make a straight line, right? And you end up with like this big thing, and you're like, I ruined my pot, right? So anchoring with your elbow and using your wrist as your fulcrum, but anchoring your body so that you have a stable point is a really key trick. So we'll spend a few minutes just kind of finishing these pots. Add any details that you want to, play around with it, have fun with it. Again, your flat brush dry will make a bit of a texture on the end. Dab it in my paint. That might be fun to add some texture with that. And if you like your pots really smooth looking, you definitely don't have to add texture. Be optional. Sure.
Christina asked if you could hold up where you put those black lines again.
Yes, definitely. Let me do another one so you can really see it here, and then I'll kind of hold it up. So right along this darkest edge and then right along the bottom, I kind of just reinforced this line so that it's kind of dark. And then you can barely see it, but right along the lightest side of my pot, there's a very, very faint, very, very thin black line. And that's just trying to give a little bit more of a definition of the edge there. Does that help, Christina? Awesome. One of the cool things about working with these shapes that are not square and not actually like these aren't actually the shapes of pots, really. They're just like these random squares, but they work in this organic way. So if you have edges, like one of my pots didn't end up super straight. I don't know if you guys can see this line here, this little skinny one. The pot itself kind of goes like, and then it like jogs in. I must have wiggled my hand on that brush. That is no big deal. It's gonna look cool in the end of it. It doesn't have to be, your lines don't have to be super straight. Your pots don't have to be very even. The nature of this particular painting is meant to be fairly loose, fairly organic in shape. All right, I see some people taking pictures. I want to see some of these pots. You guys better be brave enough to show me. Let me see what's going on over here. Let's see. Anyone want to share? Yes.
Okay.
Nice. Love it.
Cool. Oh, that's awesome.
Oh, I love the long skinny one, Jen. That's really fun. Excellent. Easy. Love it. You put a lot of tape on your pieces. Those are going to be fun highlights.
Ooh.
Folks are already working on the perfect.
Dana, those are great.
Did her pot like, oh, yours look like all sorts of different color shapes,
Oh,
Tori.
those are cool.
All right. So I think, let's see, we're right on track. We are ready to do the plants. Do you guys need a few minute break? Does anyone want to take like a break to the bathroom, or do you want to cruise right along? Dana's like, cruise on. Any other opinions? Tori's like, I want to go. Great.
I'm good. I'm good.
Great. So what you want to do to get ready for the next step is clean out your water and go get some fresh water again. Probably refill your wine glass as well.
Yeah, that's crucial.
The other thing that you might do in preparation is if you no longer have enough white space to work on your palette, then you might take some paper towels and dip the paper towels in some water and clean up a little bit of your space just by wiping the middle of your palette, because we are going to get a different set of colors out now, and you want to have at least some white palette space to do that. So make sure that you have a little clean space in your palette.
I've started doing my plants.
I know, well, you already know because you were here last time.
I'm trying to go for a theme. See? So I can hang them together.
Yes, love it.
We'll see.
So for the plants, I'm going to show you guys 4 different brush techniques that you can use to create leaf shapes and plant shapes. You can, if there's one particular one that you like and you want to do all 4 of your plants of that technique, that's great. You can wait until I show that one and then do all of them. If you want to try all of the different techniques, you can. So one is going to be a technique where we use our round brush. We start with our lightest colors in the back and we work towards darker colors, and we're using like a daubing technique. The next one is going to be where we use our flat brush, and it's sort of like a press and spin technique. The third one we are going to use like a flick technique, wrist flick. And then this one is the easiest and kind of my favorite, and it's using our round brush to press the color on. So I'm going to show you each of those as we go. And you can do them in any order that you want. And again, you can do the same one 5 times if you want. Totally open. I just want you to learn some different techniques and different ways to use your brush to get different shapes. Okay, so what you're going to do first is kind of the same thing we did for our pots. We have to get our colors out here on our palette in proximity to each other so that we can start to mix those colors and so that we can use them. So we are now going to be using our yellows and our greens. You have 2 yellows, a light and a dark yellow, and you have 2 greens, a light and a dark green. And then if you have space on your palette, you should already have this blue out, and you might want that blue. And then you probably already have this orange out, and you might want that orange to add to the yellow. In the plants, I find myself using all of the colors at some point to add layers. So the first technique, we are going to use our smaller round brush. And, oh, I'm sorry, we have to get the paints out. That's what we were talking about. Use your flat brush to get your paints out. So again, I'm just going and getting those paints. I'm going to start with my lightest paints, my lemon yellow. Whoa, my brush is not clean, apparently. Clean it first. I'm gonna start with my yellow, my lemon yellow, and I'm gonna pull a bunch of lemon yellow out onto my tray. I'm gonna get my medium yellow out. Also called cadmium yellow or gamboge, or darker yellow. And again, it's okay if they're touching on your palette because we're gonna mix them together anyways. And I'm gonna put my sap green, my lighter color green. And hopefully if some of your colors were lumpy, hopefully they have worked themselves out by now. And I'm gonna get my Viridian, which is that darker green. And again, I still have my pot colors over here because I might want my burnt umber or my gray or my brown. At any point, I might use some of those colors to change my colors and make them more earthy, okay? Okay, so I now have like these two bright greens and these two bright yellows that don't actually look a whole lot like plant colors. So we can wash our flat brush and put it to the side, and we can grab our round brush. We're gonna go ahead and mix the colors with our round brush because the round brush is what we're gonna use to paint them. So I'll show you kind of what my palette looks like. I have the colors from my pots are still here, and I've made enough space, and you guys can do this on two separate surfaces, so you can work one surface and another surface and just have them close by. I have my greens pulled out here, okay? They're all just kind of right next to each other. In fact, these two have already started mixing. That's fine. Okay, so what I want to do is find and mix a yellow. And I love that. I find myself using the word find because to me, I find my colors. I don't just mix them. Like I'm exploring the colors on my palette, moving them all around, and then all of a sudden I'm like, ooh, that's it. That's the color. I find the color. And so that's what it makes sense to me. So you want to find a color that kind of has a yellow earthy tone. To do that, I'm going to start with mixing my two yellows just a tiny bit right in the middle where they are next to each other. And I think I'm going to add just a little bit of brown. So I'm going to just like by a little bit, I mean like barely touch the brown and then get it in there. You will find brown, you like dab your brush in the brown and it will change all of your yellows. So you want to go real conservative. Tiny bit of brown. If it's too brown, add more yellow, okay? So I'm trying to find a nice in-between. Okay, I think I found it. And if you need more lemon yellow or whatever, just go get more. And then I'm not gonna do a wet on wet, so I don't need to wash my brush and get the water and paint and then dab it in. We're doing a different technique. This is just straight paint on the paper, okay? So what I'm gonna do is using the color I found, using the color I like, that's pretty light, it's pretty yellowy. I'm going to be working, it doesn't really matter which pot you start on. I'm gonna go ahead and start on the one on the right just for fun, okay? I'm gonna try to demo it like this, backwards and upside down. So we'll see how that goes, okay? I'm gonna be using my color pretty thick on my brush to daub that color in a pattern that kind of goes up and out, and I'm like going up and coming back and going up and coming back. I might have to reload my color a little bit as I go. If it starts to dry out and you feel like you don't have much color, then come back and get a little bit more, okay? I'm sort of working up and out. And right now I'm just getting the yellow on. And if you need more water, add more water if it's not spreading. I don't want it to like blend and just make a blob of yellow. So I want to go kind of conservative on the water. Keep your brush just damp and your color dark. Brush damp, color dark. And then as I daub this color up and out, I'm going to start to grab a little bit more of my sap green. So now I'm going to pull some of my sap green on my palette into that yellow, but not a lot, just like a little bit of green. And I'm gonna dab a little bit of green. And as I dab a little bit of green, I'm gonna leave the yellow at the edge of my plant. I'm gonna show you real quick where I'm working. So now I mixed a tiny bit of sap green in, but the very outer leaves of this plant are still that straight yellow color I had. Now I'm layering green, but I'm not layering, don't go as far out with the green as you did with the yellow. Go like a slight inner circle, a little bit further in. And you wanna go kind of all the way around with that green color. And once you've kind of gotten all the way around the green color, I'm gonna add a little bit more green, maybe make it a little bit darker. And this time, I might wanna add a little bit of blue, just again, like a barely dip your brush in the blue, and then add it to the green. You can always add more blue, but once too much blue, you can't take it up, you can't take it back. So I'm gonna add a little bit of blue to my green and yellow mix. I'm just trying to get progressively darker in my green. Actually, I'm finding I can actually add quite a bit of blue. So that's good news. Always better to start small with the blue. Okay, so now I have a darker green, and I'm gonna keep dabbing with my dark green. Now I'm kind of working on the middle of my plant. And the darker your green in the middle, the more it will kind of start to stand out. So I'm still going to work on this. I'm not quite done, but I just wanted to give you guys some ideas of what I'm wearing. So I'm starting to get, I'm trying to create a gradient, right, from like that yellow color on the outside to my darkest color right on the middle of that plant, right in the center. And you can end with getting some of that straight bluish gray that you had maybe from your pot, and really add some dark blues. And you'll find that it's wet enough now, you've added enough, that it'll kind of start to blend. And it won't be blue, it'll actually turn green because there's already yellow underneath it. And I'm going to kind of bring it down so it barely touches the top of my pot, so that it does look like the plant is actually coming out of my pot. So, and you guys kind of start to see that yellow on the outside, that green color right on the middle, allowing the wetness of the color to be your blender. And it's always good to vary it. So have like a few random dark colors that go out as far as the edge, but not too many. So, because plants aren't super symmetrical, right? Some are, but most aren't. So you might add like a few dark colors that come all the way out. Maybe one on one side. If you go up to here on this side with a dark color, then the other one on the other side, maybe keep it low. You want to vary it so that it's not the exact same, okay? Christina says hers is going to be the blobby cactus. That's okay. Christina, we're starting with the hardest one. No you worry. This one's the hardest one. And then it actually gets easier as you go. Another trick to watercolor painting is I highly encourage you, especially after it's dry enough that you can put it up like this, stand back. Like go like to the other side of your living room and look at your painting. And I promise it will look better than it looks up close after you've been like obsessing about it for an hour, right? Every time you're very close to it, it looks different to you than when you back up. The other trick is take a picture of it with your phone. And it like totally looks different when you take a picture of it with your phone. Okay, you guys ready for the next technique? People still working? Yeah? Most people are ready? All right, this next technique, I'm reading off of the PDF that you guys will get that has all these instructions. The next one I've called a flat brush twist. Okay, so what you're gonna do with this one, we already have some colors out here. I'm gonna make, so I have this Viridian color, right? I'm gonna use some of my blue and my browns to turn that Viridian color into a little bit more of an earth color first before I do this technique. So I have some blue and browns already out on my board. If you don't, then you can get them from your trays. So I'm gonna use a tiny bit of my brown, mix it into the Viridian. And again, start with small amounts because it's easier to add more than it is to undo it. I'm gonna add a little bit of my blue. And you'll start to see that turn into a little bit more of like an aqua color. I'm gonna add a little bit of the sap green to that Viridian. Something right in between. So it's like Viridian, sap, brown, blue, a little bit of a combo of all of those. And you can see my palette is pretty messy. I've got colors mixed all over the place. And that's kind of the process of finding your colors. Okay? So I'm putting on a color I like right here. Okay? And then I'm going to use kind of this dark, pretty straight for this technique. And I think it'll turn out pretty nice. Okay, the first thing we do, once you find your color with your flat brush, kind of just put your flat brush to the side for a minute. We're going to take that green color that you just created, and on your second pot, or whichever pot you want to, you're just going to draw just a shape, just a guiding shape to help you. So you're going to try to draw like this little stem in here, and I'll kind of demo it on this. I'll demo it and then I'm going to show you. I'm anchoring my hand, and I'm just going to go up and to the right a little bit, and then up and to the left a little bit. And by doing that, you'll actually see if you have a color that you like as well. And that'll help you know if your color's what you want it to be. And that's all just a tiny bit so that when we do this technique and we have putting the leaves on there, we have a place for them to go. Okay, then I can put my round brush aside. And I don't know, my color's actually looking a little bit more like not as darky as I want to on that. If you ever want to test your colors, again, use your scrap piece of paper to test those colors out. See if that color is the color you like. My greens, I don't know. I'm going to keep working on it just a sec. I think it needs more blue and more brown. Much like Wizard of Oz color. I'm even gonna just take my green and go back over to my browns from my pots, work over there to find the color. Now I think I have found the color I like. Yeah. Right, you see how much, this is a much earthier color. That's like a really, like the color of a green t-shirt sort of color. This is like plant green. So play around with it. Finding greens is hard. It's one of the hardest colors to like get it to look earthy. That's all right. It takes lots of practice. Okay, so now I think I have a color like, I'm going to load my green color on one side of my flat brush. And then I'm going to flip my brush over. I'm going to flip my brush over. And I'm going to scoop up just a little bit of yellow on the other side of the brush. So I'm going to load it with green on one side and just dip it in the yellow on the other side. And how this technique goes is I'm going to start with my brush kind of up on the edge. I'll do it a few times here on the table, and then I'll kind of show you a little bit closer. I press my brush down and like spin it. Brush it down and like spin it. It makes these little leaf shapes. And I'm going to move my paper around to accommodate for that as I go, so that I can do them in different locations. Okay. So let me try to do that a little bit closer to the camera so that you can see that shape. I'm going to just do it kind of here on just a blank sheet. So I'm dipping my brush in the green on one side and then dipping it in the yellow on the other side. And I'm pressing my brush down and then spinning it. I'm like pressing and spinning it. I'm trying to get it to make like little almost points, well, where it's pointed on one side and flat on the other. Okay? So I'm starting with my flat and then spinning it. Starting with my flat and then spinning it. I'm kind of doing them down towards the plant or towards my little stem that I made. Is that making sense? Any questions? We started with the hardest techniques so that we can end on the easiest ones. The reason we loaded our brush with yellow on one side and green on the other is as you spin, those colors do a little mixing. You'll find that you end up with like a combo without having had to work too hard on the combo, which is kind of fun. And I'm gonna do I have two pots that are the same shape, so I'm gonna do them both the same kind of plant with slightly different shapes. You can definitely do these on top of each other, they can overlap. And you can change your color as you go. If you're starting and you're like, I don't love that color. These plants are not going to be super well defined, right? They're kind of like these, I don't even know what kind of plants these are. Are they succulents? No idea. They're just house plants. Miscellaneous house plant number 5, I think it's called, technically. I got sucked into buying one of those really big ferns at King Soopers the last time I was there. You know those really big ones? They're like this big. And they put them all right in the entrance, right next to the flowers, and you walk in and you're like, oh, I got it.
I totally fell for that, yeah.
You have to have one of those ferns. They're beautiful, right? I came home with this fern and it wouldn't even go in the front door. And my where are you gonna put it? We don't have a very big house. It's like, I was like, don't worry, I'll rearrange the furniture. I'll find a place for the fern. Love it, love those things. All right, the next two are really easy and they're really fun. So the third one, you guys, are we ready for the third one? Yeah? Cool, we can always go back across and you can keep coming back and working on them. The third one is this sort of like spiky, maybe spider plant-ish sort of plant. And it's a fun way to practice kind of making these thin lines. So what you're gonna do is use your flat brush. And again, you probably have a variety of yellows and greens already out, so we're just gonna kind of play and mix with what some of the yellows and greens we have. You don't have to start with a particular color, but we're gonna vary it. So you wanna, the key is for every few lines, change your color. So add yellow or add green. Don't just use the same green color over and over, change your color. Let me see if I can show you that a little bit closer up. Can you guys see how the color in that?
Oh, yeah.
If you look real close, it really goes from yellow to green to yellow. And it doesn't really matter what pattern you change it in. What matters is that it's not all the same color. Okay, so there's 2 ways to get these nice strokes. I'm starting on my pot here, and I want to go kind of up and out and in different directions. And you'll notice some keys to this are that you vary the length of your lines so that some are really short and some are really long. That's another really key piece to making this look successful. If they're all exactly the same width and the same length, it won't look very realistic. So you can do it by holding your wrist and kind of that same that we did earlier where you're sort of flicking your fingers like this, up and out. Or you can also do it where you flip your piece of paper upside down and you actually pull the lines towards you. So instead of flicking your brush, instead of moving your brush away to make the line, you're actually moving your brush towards you. And I find that pulling my brush towards me is easier to get this nice thin line at the end of the plant. So let me show you that, and then I'll try to show it to you up close as well. I'm gonna use whatever. I'm just gonna pick one of my greens because I'm gonna use all of them eventually. Okay, so I'm starting right at the top of my pot. I have my paper upside down. I'm moving that green up and away. Okay, so by doing that, I can make my line really skinny. Let me do it with a darker color so you can really see that. Okay, so I'm gonna start here at my pot, sort of anchoring. I'm floating, but you guys are gonna be on your table, like anchoring your hand. Start here and then move in a quick motion, move your brush towards you. You'll find that at the end, when you do that at the end, it ends up really thin and really nice. So try it upside down, try it right side up. You might try it both ways to see which works better for you and your body and your wrist, okay? Right side up works as well. It's kind of all, it's just up to you. What works better for you? What's easier? There's no right and wrong with it. The key, what I'm going for, is that at the very end of each of these little pieces of plant, it like gets thinner as I go up and out. And again, you're varying your size, your length, and even your width. Try pressing down on some to make them thicker, and then try making some really, really light and thin so that you have a little bit of all sizes and shapes on this. And you'll kind of overlap. You can go across and then come back. You can layer. You can get some other colors going on in there if you need. You could make a few, you know, like the plants tend to have these little scragglers that fall over and bend over the edge of the pot. So you could do a few that are fun and kind of other shapes as well. And don't forget to use some yellows in here. Use a few pots that are yellow, or a few brush strokes that are yellow on top of that. And then I would definitely recommend that at least a few at the end are like a pretty dark color, and that you do them similar to how we did on the first pot, where you sort of keep to the center of your plant or to one side of your plant, and that'll kind of add some depth to it.
That was my favorite one.
Yeah, I told you they get easier. I
did like really good with that one.
I know, I like this one too. And it's fun to play around with. And it's a good way to practice making these little skinny lines. Who's liking the upside down? Maybe do this if you like the upside down, and if you do this if you like the forward. What are you guys liking better? I like upside down. You like right side up? There's a lot of right side ups. Maybe I'm totally on my own with the upside down thing. So you'll see, kind of towards the end, you see the dark pieces that I added? I used my darkest blue and even some gray mixed in with that green to get a real dark green. And that's gonna help that look three-dimensional instead of kind of look like a flat plant across my pot. Helps it stick out. Oh, Nicole, that's a great new term, a furniture. Love it. I don't know if you guys are gardeners, but in Gunnison, we are like a solid month and a half behind Denver in terms of frost days. And we just got our final frost-free night, hopefully, on Monday night. It is now firmly above 32 degrees at night, which is very exciting for us here in Gunnison. So you guys have been above 32 for like forever, like since April maybe, right? Yeah. We celebrate pretty hardcore when we get above freezing.
No, we had some cold nights not long ago. About a week and a half, 2 weeks.
Oh, that's not too long ago.
No, enough. Had to bring some plants in.
Yeah, gotta watch out. All right, I think we're ready for the last plant. Are you guys feeling ready for this last one? I have heard from everybody so far in the previous class that this was their favorite plant. So we get to end on the best one and the easiest one. Okay, so we are going to be making I'll show you the two. They turn out really different every time. We're going to be making kind of this plant shape here. And we are going to start, because now you have this like thin line technique, hopefully a little bit more down. We're going to start with that, and you're going to make 3 thin lines, or 2 or 5 or whatever, but you're going to make thin lines, like one short into one direction, one longer in the middle, and then one like medium length and sort of to the other direction. And for this, I'm going to use a pretty dark green. I'm using my round brush, and mix that green until you have a dark green. I'm going to use some of my Payne's gray and really get some dark green going. Really dark. So a lot of my gray, a lot of my Payne gray. And at this point, we're almost at the end. I might just mix all my greens together and then add some Payne's gray to them, right? Just to really get a nice color. Test them out on your scrap piece of paper if you want. But I'm going for something, maybe even some blues, adding some blues in there. Yeah, almost there. Almost found the color I want. Getting closer. At this point, my palette is starting to look quite messy. That's the sign of a good painting, when you have almost mixed all your colors together at the end. Okay, so I think I have a color I like. I'm going really pretty dark. I know it looks almost probably black to you guys, but to me it's this gorgeous dark green. Okay, so with this technique, you're going to draw those 3 little lines, one up small into one direction, one kind of in the middle and a little bit taller that maybe bends to the left or the right, and then another sort of medium one. Okay, so I'm going to start with my 3 lines here. Like that. Then what I'm going to do is load my brush up. I want quite a bit of paint on my brush, so I'm using the color I just mixed, right? I have my total mess of paints. This is where my color is that I'm liking. And I've loaded up and quite a bit of paint on that brush. And this paint is just a press technique, okay? So all I'm doing is using my round brush. I'm going to start at the top of my little shapes, and I'm going to press and lift, and then switch directions, press and lift. I'll show you a little closer. I got a few done. Okay, so I'm starting here. I'm going to press my brush down and lift it back off the paper. Press it down, lift it back off. I'm not like pulling my brush. I'm just pressing it down, lifting it back up. And then I'm changing the direction that I'm going. Press it down, pull it back up. You don't have to press down too hard. The harder you press down, the more it'll squish out, which you can do. But just a simple press usually gets a pretty nice little shape. And you can change the color as well, or you can stick with just kind of one color for this one. Whatever you want to do. If you want to add some yellows in at the bottom, that kind of adds a little interest. You might dab some yellow colors right in the middle of that plant. Watch them kind of spread up. And I'm just working left and then right, left and then right, kind of all the way down to the bottom. And then you can choose, you can either do your little designs, you can do the designs all the way to the pot, or you can leave like a tiny bit of stem just between the plant and the pot itself so that it looks like maybe more like a tree style, right? So I have just those shapes kind of working their way out. And there you have it. I mean, that's kind of the end of that plant. That one's easy. Done. And sometimes you just have to stop yourself, right? Sometimes you just start obsessing about it and you're like, okay, just stop. Just stop. Don't overdo it. But we are not done with the painting. We have two more key but small steps. Right? So finish your plant and take another big drink of wine. And let's have a little cheers before we finish the plants. Nicely done. So those are the 4 brush techniques. You're going to get this document that kind of has all the steps in your email. And there's a ton of brush techniques out there, but those are some ways that you can use your brush to make different designs. And not just for plants, but you can use those techniques for all sorts of different shapes, which is kind of fun. Okay, the last step and important step is to create little tiny shadows on our pots. And you can see in this example, do you see those little, let's see, I'm gonna have to get it real close for you to see. Do you see the little bit of gray that goes in the opposite side of our highlights? Those create just enough of a grounding for our pots that they're not like floating out there in no man's land. So they're really easy to make. You're going to use your round brush, your small round brush, and quite watered down. You're going to get the Payne's gray, and really it's going to be, I would call it a puddle of water, like a quarter, or not a quarter, maybe a dime-sized puddle of water with a little bit of Payne's gray in it. Instead of it being Payne's gray with water, it's like water with Payne's gray. Does that make sense? That's how much watered down you want it to be. It's like a puddle with a tinted puddle. And all you're gonna do is on the left side of your pots, which is the opposite side of your highlights, you're gonna just paint this little tiny kind of circle out a little ways from your pot and then come along the bottom of your pot. So I painted out a bit. I painted out here like a little oval, and then I just went right under the bottom of our pot with that gray. And it's so subtle, it's probably hard to see in a digital format. Hopefully you can see it. Can you see it? You see it just barely maybe? Okay. And I'm just going to do that for each one of my pots. They can be fairly the same. If your pot is really tall, I saw somebody painted a really tall pot, then you would want to make your shadow a little longer. If you have a very short pot, then you would want to make your shadow a little shorter.
Can you hold yours up again, please, so we can see that closer?
Certainly.
Thank you.
I'm almost done with it here, so hopefully you can see it. Can you see those?
Yep, thank you.
They're just barely visible. They're gonna look darker to you than they look on the computer. But once you do, can you guys see that? Like as soon as you do it, you're like, oh yeah, totally. Gotta have that little shadow there, right? All of a sudden it makes sense that you've got to have that to make it make sense. And then the last thing that you really should do, I make it a requirement in in-person classes, but I can't actually make you do this, is you should totally sign your name. So now that you have that little tiny brush stroke technique down, maybe on your right side of your pot, sign your name or something like that. Or your initials. Maybe if your name's long, you could just put your initials. You gotta sign your work. And then the funnest part of all is gonna be we get to pick off our little highlight bits. Do make sure that your pots are dry before you tear off your highlights so that you don't smudge something. You get to kind of pull those little pieces of tape very carefully so you don't rip your paper. If you pull them nice and slow, they should be fine. And voila, you get these beautiful white highlights that pop out of your pot, and it's really fun to see them kind of emerge at the end. Oh, I think it's my favorite part, actually. Pulling those highlights off. I find that while I paint, especially with black tape, I kind of forgot that it was tape. I thought it was black paint. And then all of a sudden I'm like, oh yeah, and I pull the highlights off. So now you can see those highlights pop off and your pots, voila, they look three-dimensional. Super fun. And that is kind of the end of our pot. So our end of our painting. Now you have a whole piece. So we chose this size because you can find frames for this size piece of paper. If you like your piece and you want to frame it, you can buy this 9x4 frame. It's also a nice size for a card, right? It could be folded and turned into a card, or you can cut it up and make things out of it. So we hope that you've liked it. I'd love to see how it went. I'd love to see some of the pieces.